as those of you who have read economic history textbooks or books on the theory of trade know, the way this is discussed in the economic profession is very strange. You know, when you would go to a book about trade, you would expect that it would begin with the history of trade in the pre-industrial period. It would then talk about how the United States, Britain, Germany, Japan, these other major industrial powers successfully industrialized. That's not what you find. Shall we try this now? Can you hear me now? No. Can you in the back?
But not from the mic.
Okay.
They can just hear you.
I'll just use my stentorian voice. It works? Okay, so you can hear me in the back? Okay, great. Okay, well that'll save me a little hoarseness. Instead, what you find is when you read books about trade, you start off with the observations of Adam Smith, who lived in a still pre-industrial Britain, and then you go to the more advanced part about David Ricardo, who lived in a largely industrial Britain where the modern large-scale technology was still not very familiar. So I don't mean to take away from Ha-Joon's eminence when I say that one of the reasons he's one of the leading historians of the actual evolution of industrial capitalism is the fact that he's one of the few. So with that, please join me in welcoming Ha-Joon Chang.
Right, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Yes, actually, one easy way to get ahead is to do something that no one else does. Yeah. So, I mean, writing about this the economic history that no one talks about makes me a leading scholar. In one of his circulars, Sieper described me as the funniest economist in the world, which is basically a one-man competition. Yeah? No one's trying to do comedy with economics, at least since John Kenneth Galbraith stopped lecturing in his 90s. So it's a really easy job. Huh? Anyway, I'm really sorry I got delayed. I mean, I didn't realize that the place has moved and went to the other place. Yes, so much for the internet revolution, you know. Right. Well, as you can see, the book has, arguably, the strangest title in the history of economics. You know, I mean, economists like to name their books in a kind of grandiose way, the wealth of nations and the general theory of money, interest, and so on. But this is kind of decidedly kind of down market, almost at the cartoon end of it. Now, actually, you know, given this title, a small kind of cottage industry has developed, discussing or rather speculating why there are 23 things. Huh? So the earliest theory was that it was because of this guy. You know, I happen to be a big fan of an American sport, but that is baseball, not basketball. I mean, of course, thanks to Nike, we all know who Michael Jordan is, but, you know, I've never really watched him in a game, so didn't realize his number was 23. And then another group of people came up with a more kind of interesting theory, saying that this must be alluding to the so-called 23 enigma in numerology, where all world's significant events are supposed to be connected to certain numbers, especially 5 and 23, apparently. As advanced in a book like this, the famous Illuminatus trilogy, which I haven't read, and the movie with Jim Carrey called The Number 23. Well, actually, I've never heard of this theory before, so that is not the reason. Yes, and the latest and, well, at least to me, most flattering theory is that the one advanced by this the elderly gentleman who translated my earlier book, Bad Samaritans, into Latvian. And he has such a high opinion of me. He thought I am a brilliant mathematician and must be making a kind of the implicit reference to the 23 mathematical problems formulated by the early 20th century German mathematician David Hilbert. Well, unfortunately, I've never heard of the guy. I'm not that learned. Well, you'll be disappointed when I tell you the real story. At one level, it's a silly story, but I still tell you the story because it tells you something about the book. Basically, how it happened was the initial working title of the book was actually 20 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. And one day I was sitting in this very nice French patisserie / cafe called Paul in the Paddington station in London. I mean, Paddington is arguably the most famous train station in, well, at least in the literary world. Yeah? I mean, you all know Paddington Bear. Yeah? And detective story fans might recognize the title 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie, although I hear that the book was published under another title in America. Anyway, I was sitting in this cafe with my literary agent, Ivan Mulcahy, this Irish guy, and we were talking about, this and that aspect of the book. And at one point, our discussion reached the issue of the title, and we were kind of suddenly looking at each other and saying to each other that, well, 20, that's a bit boring, isn't it? Yeah? So I said, yes, let's play with the number. I mean, I'm sure I could write, 29 things, 33 things, maybe not 50, but quite a lot more. But that will make the book too big. Yeah? So why don't we start at 25? 25, well, too obvious. I don't like even numbers. 21, too close to 20, so that left 23. Yeah? Yeah, I know it looks a bit like a scene in Monty Python, doesn't it? Yeah? But in a way, this episode actually sums up the spirit with which the book was written. It's a light-hearted book with a serious purpose, as my American publisher Bloomsbury puts in its catalog. So the issues I talk about all extremely serious. It's about kind of the financial crisis, the underdevelopment in Africa, the idea of post-industrial society, industrial policy, you name it. But it's written in a kind of the way that is deliberately, if you like, playful, and sometimes quite wacky. Well, so much so that Michael here, in writing a review of my book in the British magazine Prospect, said that this book, well, Chang's book, is like this book rewritten by this man. Do you know who this is? Borges, the famous Argentinian surrealist writer, Jorge Luis Borges, with the famous book Labyrinth and others. I don't think Michael meant it as a compliment, but I took it as a great compliment because seriously, which economist has been likened to Borges? And that's the greatest compliment that I can get. Yeah. So the book tries to talk about these issues in a completely wacky way, and in the process offering, as Monty Python used to say, something completely different. So carrying on in that spirit, I don't even call my chapters. That'll be too straight. So I call the chapters things. I don't even call them the first thing, the second thing. In the spirit of Dr. Seuss, I call them things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, I mean, in case that you have forgotten, these are guys from the Cat in the Hat. Now, thing 1 says that there is no such thing as a free market. Now, Micah, how much time do we have? Yeah? Okay. No, because I can go on for 3 hours if I don't control it. Okay, so this is quite a surprising proposition, because most of you think, well, hang on, some people love free market, some people hate free market, but at least we know what we are talking about. It might be a bit tricky to theoretically define it, but at least in the same way that is difficult to define an elephant in word, but when you know, when you know it, when you see it, when we see a free market, we at least know what it is. But my question is, do we really? And to make this point, I talk about the example of child labor. Well, back in 1819, number of reform-minded parliamentarians tabled this law in the British Parliament, proposing to regulate child labor. Now, the proposed law said we should not allow very young children to work, namely children under the age of 9. Older children between 10 and 16 should be allowed to work, but their working hours should be restricted. To how many hours a day? Any guess? 12, that's right, yeah. This was a time when a lot of people used to work 15, 16, 17 hours. The new rules were only supposed to apply to cotton factories, which are considered exceptionally hazardous for workers' health. Cotton textile at the time produced a lot of dust, and a lot of workers died of lung disease because the dust would accumulate in the lung and basically clog it up. So this the law was, by modern standard, extremely mild. If you propose something like that today, people laugh. But even then, the free marketeers of the day vehemently opposed to this, because they argued that this law fundamentally undermines one of the foundational stones of a free economy, that is the freedom of contract. These children want to work, these people want to employ them, and it's not as if these guys kidnap these children and force them into slave labor. These children want to work, they volunteer to work. So what is your problem? Today, even the worst kind of free market economies, at least in the rich countries, would not argue that we need to bring back child labor to truly liberate British or American or French labor market. But when you think about it, there are very few actually labor market interventions that are as drastic as a ban on child labor. For some, say, the low-income countries, almost 50% of their population is aged under 16. So if you ban child labor in that kind of society, you'll have to take out really young children, like below the age of 3, because they cannot work. But a lot of children work from the age of 4 or 5. So basically, in that kind of country, banning child labor means taking out 45% of your potential labor force out of the labor market. To put it into perspective, the U.S. federal government tomorrow announced that anyone with a social security number that ends with an even number cannot work. I mean, what do you think people will say? Yeah? But the scale of this intervention is like that. Yeah? But today, no one thinks that this as a labor market regulation. Yeah? They have come to accept the value behind this regulation. So they accept that, yes, children should have a childhood, they should have education, they should not be forced to work. And because we so totally accept that value, we don't see this as a regulation anymore. So like beauty, the freedom of a market is in the eyes of the beholder. So you could have the same market, and one person might say, yes, this is a completely free market. So say that you have a labor market with only a ban on child labor, no restriction of working hours, no safety regulations. Yeah, I mean, that someone could say that this is a really free labor market, but another person might say, hang on, I mean, this labor market shuts out nearly half the potential participant in the market, and how can you call this a free market? So we think a market is free only because we so totally approve of the regulations that are propping up that particular market that we fail to see them. But when you look at them, all markets have numerous regulations on what can be sold, who can sell them, how this can be sold. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, yeah, stock market is a free market, but is it? Can you turn up at the doorsteps of New York Stock Exchange with a bag of shares of your company and sell them on the doorstep? No. You have to get listed. And in order to get listed, can you just say, I want to get listed and get listed? No, I mean, you have to submit all your accounts, information on the criminal record of your directors, and all kinds of information for a extended period. I mean, 3, maybe even 5 years, depending on the country. Even when you get listed, does it mean that you can just buy and sell these shares freely? No, I mean, you all have to do it through certified traders. And a lot of stock markets also have circuit breakers. If the price of some stock rises or falls too much, they might suspend trading in that stock. It's highly regulated. But we don't think it's regulated because we have come to accept that those regulations are necessary. Anyway, so the free market economists like to portray all regulations as politically motivated interferences in the free workings of a natural system. But when there is no way to scientifically define a free market positions are as political as any other position. Typically the people who are worried about the negative effects of free market tend to take the position that, yes, I mean, that maybe you are right on the basis of economic logic, but we have to, as for social responsibility, we have to, preserve our heritage, and I mean but that's already conceding the ground. You have to tell these people that, well, this particular boundary that you want to draw between market and the state, market and the civil society, that's your opinion. There's no scientific reason why that boundary should be there. And indeed, if you learn history, you realize that these boundaries have changed quite dramatically. Actually, in the old days, you could buy and sell many more things than you can now. You could buy and sell human beings as slaves. You could buy and sell child labor. You could buy university places. Well, you still can't to an extent, at least in this country. You could, in some countries, openly buy and sell public offices. So that boundaries are not fixed, huh? And the breaking away from this illusion of market objectivity is the first step towards understanding capitalism, and that is why is the very first thing I talk about, huh? And then I must have pressed it by mistake. Thing 2 says companies should not be run in the interest of their owners. I mean, this is again quite bizarre. You know, we have all heard that, and then know to an extent from personal experience that people take better care of things, whether they are physical things like a house or a notional thing like a company. People take better care of things when they have a ownership stake there. Huh? So the contrast between own house and rented house, I mean, familiar stuff. So on this basis, we have come to accept that, yes, shareholders own the companies, and as owners, they have the greatest stake in the future of the company. So it is the best if we let the company be managed in the interest of the shareholders. Huh? Very simple. Huh? Now, this might have worked in the days of Adam Smith when you had, I don't know, factories making pins with 20 people. There being actually a single guy, the capitalist, who owns the company and who is actually usually in the factory, watching people, hitting them. But today, the situation is completely different. Huh? We have these companies with limited liability, hundreds and thousands of shareholders, sometimes millions, all owning tiny bits. Now, despite being the legal owners, actually these shareholders are the least committed to the long-term future of the company because they, essentially are the freest to leave. Other stakeholders in the company, like workers, suppliers, even the local community where the company is situated, they cannot leave the company that easily. I mean, of course, that this is not serfdom, so workers can always get another job. But is it that easy? I mean, for example, you might have accumulated certain skills that work only in that particular company. So yes, I mean, you can always quit, and I mean that provided that is reasonably close to full employment. I mean, you can always quit your job and get another job, but you are not going to get paid as much, because that now you'll be working as a cleaner or someone who makes a hamburger and so on. Suppliers, yes, I mean, in theory, I mean, you have been a supplier to General Motors, and suddenly you think, I think Honda's a cool company. Why don't I work with them? I mean, does it mean that as far as you quote lower prices than the existing the suppliers, you can start supplying Honda? No. I mean, it will take time. I mean, they might eventually accept you, but you will need to negotiate with them the exact product specification, the delivery schedule, maybe that the arrangement that to send some of your workers on secondment to Honda to get that extra training. They can't just do it when they decided. Whereas shareholders, if you, as a shareholder, decide to sell the share of a particular company, you can literally do it with a click of a mouse. Now, in the last 3 decades, with increasing financial deregulation and also opening up of new financial markets in the developing world, often under pressure from the IMF and so on, these free-floating shareholders have become even more powerful. So much so that the professional managers basically have decided to run the company for them, under the banner of shareholder value maximization. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to maximize your profit now. maybe next quarter, at most 1 year later, because they are not going to wait for you to deliver in 5-10 years. So you sack everyone you can think of. Of course, this will affect your company performance because the workers get demoralized, they get overworked, they make more mistakes. But the results are going to show slowly, maybe 3, 4, 5 years later. So at the particular moment, you will have a lot more profit. And then you do not do anything that will bring returns in the long run. Investment in equipment, investment in research and development, training, forget it. Okay, you might have to do some of it just to survive because there are some industries where technology moves very fast and it's difficult to keep it up without at least some minimal investment, but you do the minimum of these things with long-term return. And having generated all this short-term profit, then you give out a higher proportion of that to the shareholders through dividend. So until the 1970s, dividends used to account for between 35 and 45% of corporate profit in the United States, but today this accounts for more than 60%. So basically, the shareholders are used to take out 1/3 of the profit out of the company. Now they take out 2/3. But does it mean that the remaining 1/3 can be, at least in theory, used for investment, research and development? No, because you also have to engage in share buybacks so that you keep the share prices up. This is has become a huge drag on the American corporate dynamism. Until the 80s, share buybacks accounted for only about 5% of corporate profit. So even if the shareholders take, say, 40%, you spend 5% on share buybacks, you still have 55% of the profit to play with. Today, this is impossible. Money spent on share buybacks has skyrocketed. In 2007, the American corporations were using the equivalent of 90% of its profit in share buybacks. In 2008, it entered Borges territory, 230%. So they were actually spending 2.5 times more buying the shares than actually making money. This has become the proverbial tail that wags the dog. And what's the result? The best the example is in General Motors. Here you have a company that used to be not only the biggest company in America, but the biggest company in the world. In the 1950s, it was producing, I forget the exact number, but something like 3 million cars, or more even, when all the 12 Japanese car companies put together were producing something like 70,000. And to end up in a place like this, well, of course, they tried everything to make money except making good cars. But I'm not lying. When they first met Japanese competition, they argued, this is all because of Japanese dumping. These guys are engaged in unfair competition. So they lobbied to put the quotas on Japanese car import. Even then, consumers are not stupid. They notice the quality difference, so they kept losing market shares. And then they said, we probably cannot compete with this. So why don't we do other things to make money? For example, you buy up smaller competitors with better technology, like the Swedish company Saab, and you cannibalize the technology, or you basically turn yourself into a finance company. Did you know that by the middle years of the first decade of the 21st century, American car makers like GM and Ford were making the majority of their profit out of their finance companies? I mean, of course, these companies that have always existed, but they initially were only engaged in consumer financing. By the late 90s, they have been transformed into, well, basically financial trading companies. Huh? Now, the situation has become so outrageous that even Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric and the champion of shareholder value maximization, some people actually claim that he invented the term, came out to admit that shareholder value maximization was, and I'm quoting him, the dumbest idea in the world. You know, this is like Karl Marx denouncing communism. Huh? So, I mean, already there are a lot of financial elements in this story, but you know, the country's economic crisis not just a result of last 5-6 years of real estate boom. No, I mean it has much deeper cause, huh? And how are we going to fix that? Yeah? Anyway, to move on to the next thing, most people in rich countries are paid more than they should be. Now, quite a controversial claim. You know, in the last 3 decades especially, we have been told by free market economists that people are basically paid what they're worth. Yeah? So if Mr. Blankfein at Goldman Sachs gets $50 million, well, that must be because he's worth it. Yeah? Or if you're getting only $11,000 as a cleaner, I mean, that is because you have low productivity. Why are people poor in the developing countries? Of course, they have no skills, no education, low productivity. But is that really true? To raise a question on this issue, I talk about 2, well, fictitious bus drivers. One guy is called Ram. He's an Indian from Rajasthan. And he drives his bus in New Delhi. Another guy I call Sven. As you can guess from the name, he's Swedish. He drives his bus in Stockholm. Huh? Sven gets paid about 50 times what Ram does, but is that because Sven's a 50 times better driver? Yeah? Well, first of all, I'm not so sure actually whether you can quantify driving in that kind of way. But even if it was possible to do that, I mean, can you really say that someone's a 50 times better driver than another? Well, I mean, maybe you can if you compare Michael Schumacher and me, but, you know, I just don't see how a regular bus driver can drive bus 50 times better than another one. Yeah? And when you think about it, actually, if anything, Ram will be the better driver because he has to drive on a road like this. Yeah, you know, frankly, how many times has Sven had to dodge a cow when he was doing his job? Yeah, I mean, how many times he had to brake because of this string of children running in front of him? Yeah, how many times he had to contend for space with bicycles, stack 3 meters high with crates. Yeah, you know, he needs a lot of skill, whereas Sven can do his job if he knows more or less how to drive straight. Yeah, because he drives on a road like this. Yeah. To put it bluntly, the main reason why Sven is getting paid 50 times than Ram is protectionism, immigration control. You know, if you totally freed immigration, 80, maybe even 90% of the workforce in the rich countries can be and probably would be displaced. Yeah? And I'm not talking about relatively low-skill jobs like the driving buses and cleaning offices. I mean, we're also talking about bankers, talking about software engineers, talking about medical doctors, economists. You know, I should know because I replaced a British guy 20 years ago. Now, I'm not advocating a full liberalization of immigration. Yeah? First of all, I'm not a free market economist, therefore I don't have to do it. Yeah? But B, more importantly, I think that this will cause more harm than good. But if they are to be consistent, free market economies need to advocate full liberalization of immigration, yeah? because they want full liberalization of everything else. Yeah? Capital movement, yeah? International trade. Yeah? But why are they not doing it? Yeah? It's basically because, once again, we go back to thing one, that what they see as a free market is basically a political position. Yeah? Now, the flip side of this story is that poor countries are actually poor, not because of their poor people, but because of their rich people. Huh? You know, when you go to a poor country, you will meet a rich person, and 9 out of 10, they'll launch into a diatribe about these ignorant, lazy people that are dragging down their country. Huh? So they'll say, if our people worked like the Japanese and kept time like the Germans and were as inventive as the Americans, we'll be a prosperous country. But look at all these ignorant, lazy people who are dragging us down. No, actually, the problem is him. Yeah? It's his failure to pull the rest of the country up with him that is making the country poor. Because those ignorant, lazy people can actually hold their own very well against their counterparts in the rich countries. Yeah? Many of them actually, as we saw in the example of Ram and Sven, would be more skilled. Yeah? Seriously, I mean that because of the desire to save labor cost and also that increase control over the labor process. I mean, a lot of things have been mechanized in the rich countries. And as a result, that you can work with virtually no skill. I mean, if you want to work in a shop in a developing country, at least you need to add and subtract. To work in a shop in a developed country, you need only one hand. Yeah? The barcode machine does all the rest for you. Yeah? You don't even need two hands. Yeah? You don't need to add and subtract. Yeah? So actually, it's the failure of the rich people in the poor countries that is dragging their country down, not the poor people. Now that leaves the rich in the rich countries. So can they now pat themselves on the back and tell us that, well, only we truly deserve what we get? Yeah? Well, I don't think so. What those people don't often realize is that the high productivity they have critically depends on the fact that they were born into, or at least migrated to, societies with advanced technologies, well-organized firms, good institutions, and high-quality physical infrastructure. And most of these are things that have been accumulated collectively, and over time that wasn't created by all these people. Yeah? And the smarter ones know this. Yeah? In the book I cite an interview with Warren Buffett, who basically says, well, I believe that most of the money I earned has been earned for me by the society, not by myself. I mean, his point is that, look, drop me in the middle of Bangladesh, what would I be? I'll be a farmer, and at that a very poor farmer because I'm no good at growing anything. But I happen to have these skills which are very well rewarded, excessively rewarded in the United States. That is this financial investment skill, and that's why I'm rich. So basically all this shows the fundamentally collective nature of individual productivity. And unless we recognize this dimension, we cannot build a truly fair system of compensation. I mean, that you should not let people get away with saying that I'm getting $50 million a year. It's all because of my genius, because it's not. Okay, so I, can go on like this for the next 20 things, but we haven't got time, so I'll first show you some selection to whet your appetite. Yes, this one has attracted a lot of attention, so much that a British newspaper which interviewed me forced me to take a picture with my own washing machine. 1322. Yeah, these are all kind of quite shocking claims, but actually, when you read the book, you will realize that the conclusions are often very moderate. I'm a moderate guy, but the problem is that the world has been so brainwashed with the free market mythology that I have to shock people even to read through my Indian moderate claims. 1623. Yes, I mean that may be very popular among my colleagues. Well, basically, I burned my union card with that. Now, of these things, I have the presentation for two things, mainly because they allow me to show some nice pictures. So don't think that these are necessarily my favorite examples. So let's look at this I'm happy to talk about if anyone wants, but I haven't got time. But yeah, in case you don't know, this is the old telegraph, which in many ways was more revolutionary than the internet. Right, 13. Once again, I mean, this is attacking one of the key mythologies of our time. That we have been told repeatedly by free market economists that we have to first create wealth before we can share it. So the typical way they put it is, look, I mean, we have this slice, this pie, but we have to give a bigger slice than what we are now to the rich people, because these are people who invest, who create wealth, who create jobs. So if you give them a bigger slice, everyone will get a smaller slice to begin with. But since these people are going to make pie grow much bigger, you can have, in absolute terms, a bigger slice, even though in proportional terms it might be smaller. And on this ground, especially in this country, they engaged in tax cuts for the rich, deregulation of business, cuts in social spending, and so on. And a lot of people have basically accepted that, yes, I mean, that it isn't very kind of nice, but that this is what we have to do. Now, interestingly, I mean, that Michael mentioned this man earlier, David Ricardo. This is, of course, a classic free market logic, dating back to at least Ricardo, if not before. Unlike today's free market economists, the classical economists, people like Ricardo and Smith and so on, didn't think societies were made up of individuals. All their theories are based on class differences. So in Ricardo's theory, well, basically we have three classes, workers, capitalists, and landlords. And Ricardo argued that we have to do things to concentrate as much income as possible in the hand of the capitalism. I mean, his logic was that workers are so close to subsistence level, you give them more money, they'll all eat it up. Even then, you could say that this will make the workers healthier, but I mean that wasn't in his scheme. And then he argued that the landlords, of course, have enough surplus which can be invested, but these people are culturally not attuned to investment and accumulation. They like conspicuous consumption. So he argued that we have to do things to increase the share of the capitalists. For example, he was a very strong advocate of the repeal of the corn laws. These are basically the protection for grain producers, which he argued will increase the rate of profit by reducing wages, and in the process actually indirectly redirecting the economic surplus from the landlord class to the capitalist class, because the landlords used to get a lot of money because grains were expensive. Now you have cheaper grains from America, from Russia, Argentina. These people's income is going to fall, and capitalist profit is going to increase, and this will be good for economic growth. Now it is very interesting that this is exactly the logic which was used by this man when he collectivized Soviet agriculture. How it worked was this. At the time, what little surplus there was in the Soviet economy was basically in the countryside, because they had only tiny industrial sector. So you couldn't really expect the industry to reinvest this profit and grow very fast. So the argument was that we need to get this surplus out of the countryside and give it to the investor, which in this case wasn't the capitalist class, but the central planning authority. That's the only way to raise investment. But how do you get surplus out of these people? Well, you have to basically do a land reform, take all the land away from the landlords and the rich peasants at the gulags, and control agricultural production. And once you produce whatever agricultural output that you can, then you have to make sure that these are all siphoned off into the city. Now, typically, this wasn't actually his own idea. It was invented by this man. Well, I don't expect people to know it. I mean, you really have to be a dedicated historian of Russian Revolution to know who this guy is. And someone called Yevgeny Preobrazhensky. He was the leading intellectual on the left wing of the Soviet Communist Party in the 1920s, represented politically by Leon Trotsky. And it was actually their argument. I mean, that we have to get this surplus into the hands of the planning authority so they can increase investment and accelerate growth. People like Stalin, who at the time was on the right wing of the party, said, no, I mean, we cannot do this. I mean, maybe it makes economic sense, but politically this is a suicide. It's a country made up of 95% peasant. And how do you expect to run a country after alienating the countryside? So actually, Stalin and his friends persecuted Preobrazhensky so much he went into an internal exile to Siberia. But when he became the sole dictator, he pinched the idea and went ahead with agricultural collectivization. Now, of course, that experience had a huge cost. Not only did hundreds of thousands of people perished in the Gulag archipelago, or the labor camp for the rich peasants, this led to a huge famine in 1932 and 33. The main reason was that they were shipping out so much grain out of the agriculture sector. I mean, of course, not all of this was eaten in the cities. I mean, they exported and imported machinery and so on. Basically, the countryside ran out of grains to feed the traction animals like horses. So people barely ate, but when they didn't have the horses, they couldn't till the land. Agricultural production collapsed. At least 3 million people died. But this program delivered on its central promise, i.e., we will increase investment and increase growth. Because between the 30s and the 40s, the Soviet economy really grew at an astonishing speed. And that means that actually, today we owe our freedom to this obscure Marxist economist that everyone else has forgotten, Preobrazhensky, because without that push, the Soviet Union, it probably would have grown, but would not have been able to build this industry so quickly. And without that, there would not have been the Eastern Front. Without the Eastern Front, Britain would have been squashed. Probably America wouldn't have joined the war. They'll be hailing Hitler in Europe. I'll be hailing the Japanese emperor. So actually, anyway, let's not get into this alternative history, however fascinating it might be. But we cannot actually say the same about what I call the free market version of Stalinism, i.e., trickle-down economics that we have practiced in the last 3 decades. Despite concentrating wealth and income at an astonishing rate at the top, investment and growth have actually fallen in the last 3 decades of free market capitalism, especially in this country. Back in 1979, top 1% took 10% of the national income. Still quite high by international standard, but by 2006, which is the last year for which the data is available, this proportion went up to 23. So according to Ricardo's theory, according to Prebrzinski's theory, according to the usual free market logic, there should have been an explosion in investment in the United States and a huge growth dividend. No, actually, growth rate has fallen. Investment as a proportion of national income has fallen. So what have you been doing? You have been paying these guys, so to speak, 2.5 times what they used to get paid, and these guys deliver even less. And you swallow all this. Well, American people are very patient. Right, the next thing. Yes, this man. You all know this man, I hope. He once famously said that the problem with the French is that they don't have the word for entrepreneurship. Yeah, well, you can't expect too much from people, he was, after all, running the world, and, how do you expect him to, even know French, Now, his French may not have been up to scratch, but he was actually articulating a fairly common Anglo-American prejudice against France. France as an undynamic and laid-back country, like this, full of wine drinkers, pompous waiters, arrogant left-wing intellectuals, meddling bureaucrats, and not to forget sheep-burning farmers. Well, actually, they really did burn live sheep in one of the road blockade protests some years ago. Anyway. Now, this conception of France actually turns out to be wrong, as I'll show you with some numbers later. But the perspective behind this statement is actually widely accepted. That is, we need entrepreneurs to get the economy moving. So when people have this idea, they, go on a holiday to, Morocco, Tunisia, and when they see a scene like this, they say that, now we know why this country is poor. All these men sitting around in a cafe drinking their 11th cup of mint tea of the day, piping away at their hookahs. This is why these countries are poor. They don't work, they are lazy. But actually anyone who has lived in a developing country for a period would know that scenes like these are more typical. Everyone trying to sell everything you can think of. And indeed things that you never knew could be sold. I mean, today this job has been displaced, but in the old days, when you want to get a visa interview arranged at the American embassy, you actually had to queue physically. So a lot of countries have spontaneously invented this job of professional queuer. So what you do is you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, queue up in front of the embassy. 8:30, 8:45, some guy in suit comes up, says, that spot looks very nice. Can I have that? Okay, $50. If you're in front of the line, maybe 20 if you're in the back. Well, if you know where to go, I mean, you can buy human kidney in some of these countries. I mean, in countries like South Africa and Brazil, when you go there and park your car on the street, someone will invariably come along and say, hey, I'll watch your car while you're gone. And then my friends would pay this guy. So I said, hang on, I mean, watching the car, I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, these guys are not the official parking attendants or anything. And my friends tell me, no, actually what he meant was that I'll scratch your car and puncture your tire while you are gone unless you pay me. These countries are full of these entrepreneurial initiatives. In contrast, you look at the rich countries, most people haven't even come near to being an entrepreneur. Most people work for someone else. Many people work for very large companies employing thousands, tens of thousands of people, doing very specialized and narrowly specified jobs. And many of them don't even know exactly what the company is doing. And the numbers tell you that. I mean, in the rich countries, only about 1 in 8 people are their own bosses. Only 1 in 8 people have any chance to exercise their entrepreneurial skills, whereas in developing countries, the ratio is twice, 3 times that. If you go to extreme cases, I mean, there's basically 13 times higher chance that someone from Benin will be an entrepreneur than someone from Norway would be. And in this respect, actually, there's very little difference between the United States and France. U.S. actually has one of the lowest share of entrepreneurs. France does actually slightly better, but this is basically a case of pot calling the kettle black. They are 2 of the least entrepreneurial countries in the world. But then how do you explain this? I mean, do you have these countries where basically majority of the population are entrepreneur of some sort, and they are very poor. Another group of country where very few people are actually entrepreneurs, and they are very rich. When we think about entrepreneurship, we tend to be overly affected by the theory of entrepreneurship advanced by the Austrian-born American economist Joseph Schumpeter. Now, I have been quite strongly influenced by Schumpeter, but there's one thing that was very wrong in his theory, and it's this notion that entrepreneurship is what these heroes do. And this is very common perception. So Thomas Edison, Andrew Carnegie, Bill Gates, writing in the 1940s in his the famous book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, Schumpeter actually predicted that capitalism will go into decline and be replaced by socialism, and it wasn't on the basis of sort of Marxist class struggle. His prediction was capitalism is unfortunately now being bureaucratized. Gone are the days of these heroic entrepreneurs. Now the companies are run by what he disparagingly calls the executive types, basically bureaucrats. The system will lose its dynamism, and then people will question, given all the inequality and other bad things about capitalism, if it does not have a redeeming feature in terms of being more dynamic than other economic systems, why do we need to keep this system? And he said that people will then vote to get rid of capitalism. No, he was completely wrong. Actually, capitalism became even more dynamic after he wrote it, because in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the capitalist economies grew at the fastest rate ever. And these have not been matched since then. What he missed was that entrepreneurship is not an individualistic endeavor anymore, if it ever was. We need a host of collective institutions to channel all this entrepreneurial energy into the right kind of high productivity activities. We need the scientific infrastructure, the corporate institutions, the legal system, the financial system. Once again, we are back to our earlier thing 3, Warren Buffett. That's what he was getting at. It's not just me, it's not just individuals that do these things, the society do it. And when you understand this, you will begin to see why the currently popular microfinance industry has failed to deliver in terms of the poverty reduction and especially economic development, despite all the expectations. I mean, I don't have time to get into discussion of microfinance now, but I'll be happy to take questions on that. Okay, so let me stop here. I mean, I've talked long enough, but we need some time for Q&A. But in the meantime, let me show you the list of the things that many of which you will find outrageous. But once again, I mean, the conclusions are usually very moderate. Now, let me finish with the one remark. I mean, one purpose of this book is to question all this conventional wisdom about the capitalism. But another purpose of this book is to tell people that actually economics is nothing scary. As I say in the book, 95% of economics, as I believe, is common sense. Well, of course, deliberately made complicated through the use of mathematics and so on. Yeah, but I mean, it's not just us that everyone does it. I mean, lawyers do it. I mean, I back in England that have this document which allegedly says that I own such and such apartment in Cambridge, but I'm not actually sure whether it does because I don't understand the language. I just trust that it says that. I mean, of course, there is 5% of economics that is not common sense. I mean, like Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, Keynes' theory of effective demand, but even those can be explained in plain languages if you try it. So through this book, I want to equip my readers with some fundamental economic reasoning and some basic but misunderstood facts about capitalism so that they can better exercise what I call active economic citizenship and demand right courses of action from our political and corporate leaders. I think that's very important to emphasize because actually it's quite strange because people have all sorts of very strong opinions on many issues for which they are not qualified to make a judgment. I'm sure you all have a view on Libya and Iraq, but how many of you have a degree in international relations? I'm sure that you all strongly believe that the Federal Drugs Administration have to rigorously test new drugs. But do you have any? How many of you have a degree in pharmacology? But people still do. But when it comes to economic issues, you say yes. I mean, I don't know anything about economics. Larry Summers, a clever guy, he must know what he's talking about. Well, I think people in this room, but probably know too much about him. So I really wanted to tell my readers that it's not like that. It doesn't have to be like that. It shouldn't be like that, actually. And that we all need to learn some economics and more actively exercise our economic citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you can see why in my review of Dr. Chang's book I compared him to a cross between John Maynard Keynes and Horace Historians. Time for some questions, so please wait until Shane Henry has delivered the microphone to you.
Hi, Robert Schroeder, international investor. You'll be pleased to know your book is sold out here, so we're going to have to go to the bookstores to pick up a copy.
Sold out,
now.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You didn't touch on free trade.
Sorry,
and I'd like
can
to
you
hear
speak
your
a little
views. A free trade. I think one of your chapters refers to it directly, and I wonder if you could enlighten us about your views on why free trade is not working as it should.
Shall I collect a few questions and answer them together?
Thank you very much for your lecture. It's very stimulating. I think you must have an original definition of what capitalism is, and I'd like to hear it.
One more question.
Your book obviously goes into some common, disabuses some common and necessary assumptions of capitalism. Discuss an alternative to capitalism.
Right. Well, yes, first of all, on the issue of free trade, when the economists tell you that the economic theory tells you that free trade is the best, of course, they don't tell you that that conclusion is based on models that have a lot of assumptions. And many of these are violated in reality. But, I mean, I'm happy to kind of ignore those problems. I mean, my issue with free trade is actually for the long term. So in the short run, yes, free trade benefits, usually, not always, everyone. But when it is applied, when you look at it from long-term point of view, actually this makes it impossible for less developed countries to catch up. Because basically Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, which is at the foundation of all mainstream trade theories today, says that this is a very counterintuitive idea, and initially I got into economics because I was so fascinated by this idea. Now I spend my time criticizing it, so there's the irony of history. But before Ricardo, people believed that you have basis for trade only when each trading partner has something cheaper to offer. So when, for example, in the 17th century, Britain sent an ambassador to China, the Chinese emperor famously said, "Why should we want to trade with you? Because we produce everything cheaper than you do. Go away." That is in economics known as the idea of absolute advantage. And Adam Smith actually believed in it. But when Ricardo came up with this new theory, he said, no, actually, even then, you should trade. Because you might be bad at everything, but there must be something in which you are relatively less bad at. So that actually, even when one country has low productivity across sectors, it actually makes sense to trade with another country. And this is a great theory. And I believe that this is correct in the short run. But problem is that in the long run, you have when you follow this, basically it means that you have to stick to what you're already good at, and it's very difficult to get out of those activities. And this is why the first Treasury Secretary of this country, Alexander Hamilton, came up with this idea of infant industry protection. So backward economies, unless they initially protect and nurture their young producers, will not be able to catch up with the more advanced nations. Now, so that's my main issue with free trade. Of course, I mean, as I earlier said, there are lots of assumptions. So when they are violated, things don't exactly work. So, for example, one reason why even in the short run, a lot of countries are having problem with the free trade is because the model does not really consider adjustment cost. I mean, when, say, the classic justification of this is, you sign a trade pact with NAFTA at Mexico through NAFTA. Of course, some things like textile and so on will lose jobs because of Mexican imports, but then we'll now export more computers, more aircraft to Mexico, so everyone will gain. Trouble is that the textile workers who lose jobs through this process may not get redeployed at all. So that's known as adjustment cost. And you can solve this problem with appropriate public policy intervention, but it is usually not. And one important reason why it is not really taken seriously is because it's not in the model. So people don't really think about it. So actually, I'm not one of those people who are categorically against free trade. So under certain circumstances between similar countries, yes, I mean, it's a good idea. But I mean, the underlying assumptions are not, often not met even in the short run. And in the long run, this becomes an obstacle to the development of poorer countries. Now, what is my definition of capitalism? Well, basically, I see it as an economic system which is predominantly based on private ownership, although not exclusively, and a system that is, once again, predominantly run on profit motives. So that's my definition. What are my alternatives? Well, actually, my alternative to capitalism is capitalism. My view of capitalism is that like Winston Churchill's view on democracy. He famously said, well, democracy is the worst political system except for all the others. Yeah, my view of capitalism is the worst economic system except for all the others. And the problem is that people often think that there's only one way to run capitalism. So either you are at the United States or North Korea. No, this is wrong. There are many different kinds of capitalism. American capitalism is very different from the Japanese one, which is very different from the Swedish one, which is very different from the French one, which is very different from the German one. And we have actually regulated capitalism much better in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I'm not saying that it was some kind of the Garden of Eden, but it was working much better, having higher growth, more equality, more stability, and so on. So actually, it's not as if I'm calling for something which is completely new. I mean, I of course have certain proposals in the concluding chapter of the book, the 8 proposals or whatever. But capitalism can be reformed and has been reformed, and therefore I would say that my alternative to capitalism is another kind of capitalism.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Wait until Shane gets the microphone to you. Shane, up front.
Question about thing 2. Would you agree that you should run companies in the best long-term interest of shareholders, patient ones like a Warren Buffett?
Want to get a few more questions?
Thank you. I'm Dr. Caroline Poplin. This is what I do for fun. I think it's wonderful that there are now economists who are talking about, when I graduated from college in 1969, there was only one kind of economics. It's now called neoclassical, and it's very biased. In connection with another gentleman's question, what do you think about investment? I mean, when Americans are told we need to invest, not consume, and that seems to me put more money in the stock market. And I wonder whether that kind of money really goes for the production of goods and services the way investment is supposed to.
Okay, one more question?
Yeah.
Back there.
Thank you very much. And I'm really enjoying your lecture, and I want to ask that because I read your book very.
Can you speak up?
Yeah, I really enjoy reading your book. So I think this lecture you didn't mention that, but according to your book, it's like the differences between the developed history in the Eastern Asia and Latin America or Sub-Saharan Africa. So what is the most important factor or the thing to the developed one's country? Because, for example, Eastern Asia, they have a good governance, but the only governance or they had met a good luck, or so I just want to wondering what's your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah. There was one more. Yeah. Oh.
Thank you. I just wondered if the denial of limits is essential to capitalism. Physical limits, ecological
ecological
the
limits.
denial of limits, physical, ecological, and social limits.
Right. Right. Thank you for all these good questions. Yes, I mean that shouldn't we run the company in the long-term interest of shareholders? That would be actually correct if shareholders cannot move that easily. I mean, actually, this kind of system exists in countries like Japan and Germany. I mean, of course, that people buy and sell shares there, but that these countries would, companies in these countries would typically have some core shareholders who are determined to be there forever. So that yes, for those people it works, but what is the long-term interest of, say, me as a shareholder of, say, Samsung today, because I could become a shareholder of Nokia tomorrow. So I think there is the fundamental difficulty. I mean, I'm not saying that we should ban buying and selling of shares, but countries have actually over the last century recognized this fundamental dilemma, and they have introduced all kinds of measures, some formal, some informal, to restrict these things. So, for example, in Germany, you have a two-tier board structure where the supervisory board, which has to approve all the really big decisions like the mergers and takeovers and so on, is half represented by the trade unions. And as a result, in the last 50 years of post-Second World War German, 60 years of post-Second World War German capitalism, there have been only like 2 or 3 hostile takeovers. So the managers can actually manage with a longer-term view. In Japan, this is done through an informal channel of what is typically known as friendly shareholding. Yeah? So you are kind of the companies that have some historical connections, like all the Mitsubishi companies, which are legally all separate entities, or your main bank or main insurance company or your key suppliers. I mean, you have cross shareholding. And I mean, this ratio has been falling in the recent period, but throughout most of the post-second war period, I mean, basically between 50 and 60% of Japanese company shares were locked up in someone's safe. Of course, I mean, these people could sell them if they are under their own financial difficulties, but the understanding is that you will do it only as a last resort. So, I mean, I cannot go further into that, but that's basically how I see it. Now, investment, yes, when we talk about investment by individual, this is very different from investment that appears in the national accounts, because we put money somewhere, but that money ultimately has to be embodied in physical things to be called investment, be it factory building, road, or the computers. So yes, I mean, a lot of Americans, I mean, it seems quite paradoxical because a lot of Americans have invested, but actually that investment didn't end up in investment in the conventional sense, because basically the stock market in this country and also in Britain and a few others have stopped working as a channel, the mechanism to channel money into companies. Actually, they have become the ATMs for shareholders. Because if you look at statistics, in most years, the American stock market takes out more money out of the corporate sector than it gives to it. So there's the kind of terminological confusion. What has distinguished the more successful economies, developing economies from the others? There are many different factors, but the one thing that I think people don't often highlight is the difference in the approaches to, say, consumption and investment. Once again, back in early 1960s, Japan had only about, this was the time, of course, when the American income was only about $3,600 or something per capita. But at the time, Japan had $400 income, and Argentina had $400 income. Neither could build decent cars. Argentina's approach was, well, we cannot build decent cars, but we want decent cars. So how do we do it? We invite Fiat, we invite Ford to come and build the decent cars for us. And there was no intention that they would one day build their own nice cars. The Japanese approach was, well, we can only build trashy cars. Well, we will drive around in trashy cars, but in the meantime, we'll invest to be able to build world-class cars 30, 40 years later. And that's what you are seeing. So I'm highlighting only one aspect and grossly exaggerating it, but things like that really matter. I mean, it's a lot of things that are supposed to be causes of underdevelopment in Latin America or Africa. These are usually symptoms. Things like corruption. I mean, these are usually symptoms of underdevelopment rather than causes. So the most important thing is to develop productive capability. The last question, yes, I mean, limits to growth. I mean, there are social limits to growth, which was brilliantly explained by Fred Hirsch, the British Jewish economist, who is sadly very undervalued, but there's that book. But these days, more importantly, we have physical limits to growth. I mean, we may run out of the planet, so to speak. So how are you going to deal with that? I must confess that it's not a question that I directly tackle in this book. I mean, for the simple reason that I do not have enough competence to talk about it. You know? It's not because I think it's unimportant, but I'm wholly with the sort of environmental sustainability people on many issues, not necessarily all, but let's leave it at that. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Ha-Joon Chang. Thank you.